We're joined now by independent journalist Lee Fang, who testified just yesterday before the House Select Committee on Weaponization about some of his excellent reporting, which you can and should read and follow at leefang.com. That's the link to Lee's Substack. Lee, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. So we have a clip of you testifying that I want to get your thoughts on quickly. Let's roll Lee's testimony, this part of Lee's testimony, in front of the House yesterday.
More recently, in collaboration with Unheard and Real Clear Investigations, and with my co-author Jack Polson, I reported that Moderna relaunched these efforts to influence vaccine discourse last summer, again working with public good projects. Moderna employed the services of the artificial intelligence firm Talkwalker to monitor vaccine-related conversations across 150 million websites, including social media and gaming platforms like Steam. There are many other examples in my reporting, beyond the Twitter files and Moderna documents, that show overreach by government and corporate interests to stifle free speech. Last month, I revealed documents on the activities of Logically, a British artificial intelligence firm that is poised to shape the 2024 election. It is important to underscore why the American public should be aware of this firm. Logically previously had contracts in the United Kingdom to combat misinformation during the pandemic, but like many other firms of this nature, they instead surveilled legitimate forms of speech, including thoughtful concerns about pandemic lockdowns. Logically boasted of a special partnership with Facebook to automatically suppress and label any content they deemed as misinformation, giving the company immense influence over content moderation decisions. In my official written remarks, my testimony, I go into much greater detail about my record on these issues, writing on censorship and surveillance of animal rights activists and labor union activists. I have profiled the various private contractors that began by spying on behalf of the FBI during the War on Terror that now utilize artificial intelligence to spy on conservative anti-vaccine mandate activists. More recently, I've reported on organized suppression of peaceful speech by pro-Palestinian activists.
So, like Matt Taibbi, Michael Schellenberger, Emma Jo Morris, and others before you, Lee, you were peppered by questions, as is custom, by members of the committee. Tell us a little bit about that experience, what it was like sort of having your reporting be front and center at a hearing when, some people on one side of the aisle have different motivations than people on the other side of the aisle. What was it like yesterday?
Well, sure. These committee hearings are a little bit substantive, a little bit political theater. I used it just as an opportunity to showcase my reporting, to talk about a principle that I hold dear, which is free speech. It was a good opportunity. Having that additional platform to engage with the members was a good experience. And, it's not every day that you get to talk to a large number of Republican lawmakers about Palestinian free speech, about free speech on the internet, to criticize the Department of Homeland Security in the halls of Congress. I really enjoyed it.
5 years ago, you probably would not have expected that Jim Jordan and Republicans would have called you to testify in front of Congress.
No, this term is a little bit cliche sometimes, but it is a realignment on these issues. And we did get into an interesting back and forth about that, as the Democrats were kind of ignoring the substance of the hearing. Every time a Democrat member had the microphone, they would just talk about Trump and how Trump would be a dictator and how dangerous Trump is, and we need to talk about Trump in the election, not talk about free speech and social media censorship. And I just kind of detected a little bit of cognitive dissonance there, because if you're concerned about an authoritarian president, no matter the party, wouldn't you want to dismantle a government and law enforcement apparatus that allows the government to control what we can read on social media and in the news?
Before we get into your most recent piece that is, I think, fascinating on this whole question of censorship, how did they respond to your pushback about Palestinian censorship? Because it has been the most kind of blatant contradiction in their kind of censorship and cancel culture values to say, well, actually, except for this case.
Well, look, I think there are probably some fair weather supporters of free speech. It's easy to support free speech when your side is being censored. It's hard to stand up for your enemies or your political opponents, but that's where the real principle lies. But I do see a number of the Republican lawmakers kind of alarm bells going off in their head when I was talking about the issue. Talked about it privately, including about just this general principle of, hey, we need free speech for everyone. We're in an open society, a free society. We don't have the answers. We don't think the government should have all the answers either. We need to debate and discuss these issues.
Yeah, and I think because of Trump, Republicans not everyone. Again, like there are obviously some fair weather people, but they're getting a taste of how the imperial presidency can be used against them. Obviously the military and war and all that is a different question because that's been going on for years. But like this new post 9/11 security state, which is you're reporting on DHS, you're reporting on STUNS, you're reporting on all of these things that are under the umbrella of the security state, essentially being weaponized in elections, which is fascinating.
Look, it wasn't that long ago when Democrats were leading the charge against the Department of Homeland Security and the expansion of the security state, saying that the Bush administration will exploit this new agency created after 9/11 to sway elections and suppress our civil liberties. Now the biggest cheerleaders for the expansion of the DHS are the Democrats. I mean, that's just kind of unfortunately how polarization works here in Washington.
And so let's get into this new reporting, kind of a new Twitter Files report that you put up earlier this week. It's such a funny isn't the word, but it's also kind of funny.
It's kind of funny.
So New York Times reporter Reed Epstein, so we can set the stage here. It's early in the morning of the election in 2020, and we're all waiting for Wisconsin's votes to come in. And he tweets out that, do I have the exact tweet here? He says, Green Bay's absentee ballot results are being delayed because one of the vote counting machines ran out of ink and an elections official had to return to City Hall to get more. Then an election official responds, that's not true, they don't use ink. And then the main election official account retweets that. And then you have a whole kind of pile on against Reed's of all of these people saying this is misinformation, which is, it's Twitter, it's fine.
Yeah.
Let them hash it out. But then you have the kind of government hall monitors flag it for Twitter itself. So pick up the story from there, because that to me is where it gets deeply disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, this should be an innocuous tweet. It's a reporter making an observation about the political process, something that he had seen firsthand. And rather than it just being a benign tweet, it set off alarm bells in Washington almost as soon as these local Wisconsin election officials disputed the accuracy of this tweet.
Yeah, like 3 in the morning, right?
3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, something like that. It gets forwarded along to the Department of Homeland Security, top countering foreign influence official at the agency, forwards it along to Twitter in San Francisco and starts pressuring the tech company to take action. Now, of course, the DHS says, we never force these tech companies to do anything. We don't censor speech. We don't police speech. But they say take action. And then Twitter says, we're escalating. DHS responds, thank you. So it's clear that they wanted a certain type of action. And what action did they take? They censored the tweet. The tweet was going viral. It had about 3,000 retweets initially. Once Twitter took action, escalated the tweet, those retweets disappeared. Anyone who quote tweeted it, that tweet, poof, it's gone, vanished. It still carries a warning label now today. If you try to read it, it says warning, misinformation.
It still has a warning label?
Still has a warning label. You still can't quote tweet it. You can't interact with it. You can't comment on it. It's still shadow banned, I think is the right term for this, because it didn't get deleted, but it's all of the sharing function, all the different type of tags that get attached to it to block its visibility are there. And here's the rub. The tweet looks accurate.
Tell us about this.
This is the crazy part, because that whole process is wrong, period, even if Reed was wrong.
Right.
Like, to me, then, okay, DHS and the election officials reach out to Reed and say, you're wrong.
Right.
Correct it. Like, I've said incorrect things before, and I hear from the people who I reported on, and they're like, that's wrong. I'm like, and they prove it's wrong, and I correct it. Like that, and that's fine. Like, that's how it goes.
That's how it should go.
But it turns out, go ahead, he was not wrong necessarily.
Right. The local election clerk who disputed the tweet was acting under the assumption that Green Bay was only using the DS-200 machine, which does not use ink. So she said, it's impossible. But that's normally the case. But because it was 2020 and Wisconsin was expecting higher than usual turnout, they leased an additional vote counting machine that does require ink, that is attached to an external printer. And there were some ink issues that night. So not only was the allegation based on a false assumption or misunderstanding, they didn't verify. They didn't do any of the kind of basics when you're engaging in any kind of media work like this, and especially sensitive media work. And I think this issue reflects the larger problem of this censorship regime. You do have the case of, and you know, I've documented many cases of this on my Substack, and so have others, from the Twitter files, that there are politically motivated censors out there, people who have a partisan or ideological bias. But there's also just the, hey, if you're hastily censoring people without doing any of your own fact checking, you're just taking the whatever kind of data is given to you by a government official and you assume that that's the truth handed down from God, you're going to get it wrong. You're going to end up censoring truthful information. And I think the other big kind of impact of this is that Wisconsin, a lot of people did not trust the integrity of the ballot there.
Right.
And so when you have the government censoring true information about the vote count, that doesn't increase trust in our elections. That really contributes to the erosion of trust. Because who do you trust here? If the government's saying, hey, we've got to protect the integrity of this vote, we've got to make sure there's no misinformation that lies to people, and then they're contributing to the lies, who do you trust here?
Exactly, and that's why you have the free press in this ecosystem, is so that there can be some modicum of trust, and there can be some checks and balances. And you reported on this with Moderna too. Can you get into, and a lot of actually other cases, can you get into that distinction between outright censorship and suppression, which is something that the government and tech lean heavily on? They say this is not, you can still find the information. You could still read the New York Post's Hunter Biden laptop story. It was just, you know, algorithmically suppressed or whatever. Can you talk a little bit about how they rely on that distinction and weaponize really that distinction to defend themselves?
And before you answer, I just want to flag, and maybe we can put this up in post, but yeah, the tweet today reads, some or all of the content shared in this post is disputed and might be misleading about an election or other civic process. You can click to learn more, or if you're a rebel, you can click view.
Whoa!
And there's the tweet after you click view.
It's like an NSFW tag, but just for an election report from the New York Times reporter.
And it says it has 5 reposts.
Yeah, it's like the parental advisory content on like a Tupac album.
Yeah,
exactly. Watch out, kids. But yeah, you know, just talking about this kind of broader issue of censorship, you know, my reporting differs a little bit from some of the other Twitter files journalists. You know, I also took a focus on private sector influence. And, you know, that opens up some different legal questions. Perhaps it's totally legal for one oil company or pharmaceutical company to collaborate with the private platforms to tell you what you can read and not read about their products or about the policies that affect them. But we live in a free society, or I hope we live in a free society, and we need to have debates around this topic. And a lot of the censorship did not just come from the government. It came from companies like Moderna, Pfizer, funding lobbyists who worked with NGOs who were helping craft the content moderation policies at Twitter, giving them actual lists of accounts to amplify and de-amplify. In some cases, those accounts that they were targeting to be de-amplified ended up getting banned. A few of these accounts did, you know, promote messages about vaccines that were not true, you know, messages about microchips. Sure. But some of them promoted messages that are legitimate areas for public policy debate. People criticizing the idea around vaccine passports. You know, this idea that the only way you could engage in commerce, go to a restaurant, have a business, was to show your vaccinated status. They took tweets like that and from groups that were funded by Big Pharma, targeted those messages. So that's just another form of censorship. Again, the legal area is different because it's not the government, but still it has the same impact.
And they're funded so heavily by the government that it's hard to divorce them from
no, that's
the
true. I mean, Moderna
anyways.
taking their basic science from NIH and big funding from Operation Warp Speed. What is the distinction between government and corporation here?
Right.
While I've got you here, I'm curious, how's the Substack life? How are things going? People should. I'm a subscriber to his Substack. Everybody should sign up.
Yeah.
LeeFang.com, LeeFang.substack.com. We'll get you there.
Lee microchipped Ryan.
There you go. But how are you liking it compared to, you know, because the rest of your career has been in newsrooms for various newsrooms, including the Intercept, for a long time.
Yeah.
What's it like being out as an independent reporter?
I'm still figuring out my path. You know, I launched this Substack last April, and, you know, just personally, it's been a journey. You know, I kind of started out at a more partisan, left-leaning site, sponsored by Think Progress, sponsored by the Center for American Progress, and that didn't work out because I kept clashing with the editors and the people of the think tank because I wanted to criticize the Democratic Party. I wanted to criticize and report on corporate interests that were funding the Center for American Progress. And
they're like, yeah, no, that's not what we're here for.
That didn't work out. And I joined a number of more progressive left magazines and outlets. And they have their own kind of editorial freedom issues. Because of the polarization in Washington, a lot of right-wing, right-leaning outlets. You got to be a good foot soldier in those ideological trenches.
Sure.
Same on the left. And I just have to be my own man and be my own journalist. And I want to be able to call out wrongdoing, whether it's on the left, the right, or the center. It's difficult to report on groups like Antifa, where the extreme elements of the abolish the police movement, if you're on the progressive left. And serving the public interest, I have to call attention to those issues as well. So I like Substack for the editorial freedom. I do miss working in a team, though. I like working with editors and other journalists. I brought in some friends to help me with some stories. I worked with my friend Jack Paulson on a big story on efforts to suppress and cancel people trying to talk about Palestinian human rights. So yeah, it's a mix, but if really enjoying it, and if your viewers have an opportunity to subscribe, I would welcome their subscription.
How have the readers responded to the Palestinian coverage? Because Glenn Greenwald, another of our former colleagues, has talked publicly about how a lot of people who liked his criticism of kind of cancel culture and censorship previous to October 7th, all of a sudden found him to be problematic, and we're leaving.
Yeah, no, I did lose a few subscribers writing about Palestinian human rights and free expression. I've lost readers pretty much with every story. You gain some and lose some, and actually, to the credit of my subscribers and to my readers, a few people who said, "I'm quitting. I'm not subscribing to you anymore because you kind of wrote this story." A lot of them came back and said, "I love your journalism," and never mind, I changed my mind, and I've communicated with them. Substack's a great platform because it really connects you more with the reader, and I enjoy the back and forth. I don't know if I'm not the arbiter of truth. I'm trying to do my best to find the facts and put it in context and do the reporting and deliver it to the reader. But you never know. Everyone has blind spots, and I enjoy communicating with the reader, communicating with people from different viewpoints, and yeah, it's been a really good experience.
On a scale of 1 to 10, rank Ryan as an editor. I'm kidding. One last question, Lee, for you is, are you still picking apart Twitter file stuff? Are you still going through those documents? Yeah, I've got a few others that I'd like to release later this year. And I'm combining them with other documents. One thing that I found interesting is that recently I've been looking at some of these firms in Europe, and there's new scrutiny there because in Europe and the UK there are stronger data laws, kind of like our Freedom of Information Act requests, but you can request your own data. So for people across the ideological spectrum, mostly on the right, they've been making requests to their government and to private sector firms to find out if they've been censored, they've been canceled. And so they're doing their own kind of citizen journalism based on these data laws that we don't have so much in the US. California has a mini version of this. And I've been getting into that a little bit, and it's been super interesting. That sounds great. Well, all the more reason to subscribe at leefang.com. Lee, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for having me. Of course. Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points. If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify. Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.